All right, my street law class. Here's a lecture video you're going to be watching and copying into your guided notes. Some of this you might already have from class, depending on how far we got. So the first few minutes you might be able to skip. Obviously, if you were absent, then watch it and copy it down. Or if we didn't get to it in class, then obviously go ahead and do it. So obviously we're going to be on our next unit. Unit 3 is going to be on crime scene investigation and how to handle a crime scene, as you can see by the slide. So let's get starting off with the basics. Is well, okay. Well, what is a crime scene? What does that mean? So when we think of a crime scene, we think of the biggies. We think of like murder. We think of maybe arson, things that kind of capture in the news. However, any crime or any call that a police is called to, that police can go on, is really considered a crime scene. And there's certain protocols and certain things that they're trained to do, and that there's reasons for why they do what they do in terms of the yellow tape and other protocols. Um, every call they go on is considered a crime scene. So burglaries, assaults. So every call they go on is considered a crime scene. So burglaries, assaults, again. So anything that they go on is considered a crime scene. I think you get the picture with that. All right, so evidence and crime scene investigation. So the goal of a crime scene investigation is to recognize, what's going on at the crime scene, what potential crimes could have, may or may not have occurred. You want to document everything. There's a lot of paperwork involved with it, and pictures, as you'll see in a little bit. And you want to collect as much evidence as you possibly can at the crime scene. Essentially, when you enter a crime scene, you want to make sure that you're trying to piece together all the clues that can allow you to paint a picture about what happened. Again, all the things that are there could be used to look at potential suspects. So if the crime scene is tainted and the police did not do a good job of locking down that crime scene, that evidence could be smeared or moved or altered, and ultimately, if that's the case, there goes the crime scene, there goes the case. Again, one of the beautiful things about our country is that, as a suspected criminal, if you're accused of a crime, we have rights, right to a lawyer, right to a fair trial. So you're innocent until proven guilty. So it's very important for police to lock down the crime scene, to keep the crime scene in its most purest form. So with that being said, there's something called the Locard Exchange, and this was created by Dr. Edmund Locard. Every criminal can be connected to a crime by a small particle. So it's kind of was really like the early findings of like DNA and forensics. Excuse me. That when you enter a crime scene, usually there's a small part of you that can be left behind or that can potentially be found, whether it's a fingerprint, whether that's DNA, hair follicle, whatever the case might be. So that's why, again, it's very important for police. You want to try to create as less people in that crime scene as possible. So again, keep it in its most purest form. So obviously, as you see here, this is why, when this theory came about, and really it makes sense. This is why securing the crime scene is very important, that whenever two objects come in contact with one another, there's a cross transfer of physical evidence. So if I go into the crime scene and I'm touching things without proper things, my DNA will now be at the crime scene. It's a cross transfer. So again, the intensity, the duration, the nature of materials in contact can determine the extent of the transfer of DNA and my things being there. So again, that's a Locard exchange. So evidence. There's one of the examples of evidence is testimonial evidence. Now, what does that mean? Testimonials is it's admissions, it's confessions, it's statements from involved parties. And now, again, as we're learning about, and as you guys did some of your activities before, hopefully watching this, a lot of testimonials are not always the most accurate things to go by. Now, again, it's valuable. Police should still take it. Eyewitness accounts are good because it can kind of piece together a story. But again, they're not always accurate. There are some flaws with eyewitness accounts, as we'll talk about. So eyewitness accounts by victims or witnesses Eyewitness accounts vary considerably from person to person. Um, if what one person might see, somebody else might not see, or maybe again, a lot of factors go into what you're seeing. Is how's the light? How far away are you from the crime scene? Um, so sometimes they're not always reliable. And there have been a lot of cases over the years where eyewitness accounts um, have led to wrongful convictions. Because sometimes the eyewitness accounts, they didn't get it all right. They think they got the right suspect, but ultimately they made some mistakes. Again, not on purpose, but um, that's sometimes what happens. So there's something called a theory called cross-racial effect. So again, highlight this in your notes, guys. So this is one of the terms that you should know, along with, if you go back to the last slide, testimonial evidence. I would know what that is. Same for a low guard challenge. I would highlight that in your notes so it stands out to you. So when you're looking for things, it can be easily found. So anyway, cross-racial effect. People within their own race have an easier time identifying characteristics of a person than outside of their race. So, you know, for instance, um, if you're African American eyewitness and you're identifying characteristics of an African American suspect, typically within your own race, you have an easier time identifying key characteristics of a person. Whereas if you're of different races, African American and Caucasian, Caucasian and African American, whatever the case might be, sometimes you have a more difficult time really highlighting some of those characteristics that can be vital in eyewitness accounts. So they call it a cross-racial effect. So there's something called the Innocence Project. Again, I would highlight this in your notes as well. This organization had their aim, and this project is aimed at freeing people who are wrongfully convicted. They look at former cases that may have had some flaws to it, and they do some deeper investigations of some of these cases where people have maybe been wrongfully imprisoned, and they look at, and their aim is to try and free them. So another thing too, 87% of all wrongful convictions were a result of flawed eyewitness accounts. That's really kind of, I think, really interesting. That you have people who have been wrongfully convicted, and in that case, 87% have been people that have been there was an eyewitness that was really damning to their case, and sometimes those eyewitness accounts, as you can see here, they weren't accurate. So pretty interesting. So what effects? So why does this happen? What affects our observations? You kind of see this little chart here in terms of information from our senses, what we pay attention to, your perception, short-term memory, long-term memory, all play roles in what our brain perceives, and what can cause some issues, and why sometimes eyewitness accounts aren't always accurate. So our brains do not always pay attention to information around us. Sometimes it picks and chooses to what's obvious and what your perception is. Again, we all do this differently. Sometimes our perception is we don't interpret everything that is around us. Sometimes it's skewed by emotion or your state of mind at the time. If you've gone through a trauma, your perception might be different. You might have a short-term memory problem, especially if you're somebody who dealt with a trauma, who might have had an issue, you weren't able to focus on every little issue. Or it could be long-term memory. Maybe over time, your memory fades out and you forget those details. So there's something called physical evidence as well. So what is physical evidence? It's basically things that are physically left behind. So weapons, bullets, shell casings, paint chips, documents, shoe tire marks, tool marks, soil, drugs. So anything that's physical at the crime scene are things that police look at and take. And obviously this is a good thing to have during an investigation. And then you have your biological evidence. You have your body or body parts, body fluids, hair, leaves, plant particles, natural fibers, feathers, wood, things that could be analyzed for DNA or give police clues in terms of maybe where a crime may have occurred. And then you have your trace evidence. Again, all these things should be highlighted in your notes, by the way, so it stands out to you. These are all types of physical evidence. And then your trace evidence is like small particles, physical, biological materials that are found at a crime scene. So strand of hair, fingerprints, DNA, things that aren't always seen by the naked eye. blood, pollen. So again, these are, again, trace evidence is small but measurable amounts of things that can be measured and looked at. Evidence can also be divided into what? So there's two different types of this. So you can break apart evidence into two different categories. One is class evidence. So class evidence means that you narrow down the evidence to a group of people or things. So for instance, blood could be a prime example of that. So if you get blood and there's A, there's B, there's AB, there's O. So obviously, if you find blood at a crime scene, it fits in one of those categories. So you know a potential suspect could be, if the blood comes back A, then you know you're looking for people that are in that same class, hence class evidence of people that have that. Or if you find like a red hair strain, same thing. You might find, again, that breaks it down into a class of people. And then you have your individual evidence. So this is something that's more individualized. So fingerprints, handwriting, DNA is a very physical characteristics. So class evidence may become more individualized. So blue jeans, we may be able to narrow them down by brand, material, size, color. If they were worn, they might have rips or stains on them. So I hope that makes sense in terms of what you can classify evidence as. So again, same thing. I'm going to highlight this in your notes. So again, what is the importance of evidence? Obviously, it kind of speaks for itself, but evidence can prove a crime has been committed, and it could set the scene for investigation. So you're proving something that this crime did happen, and then from there you're trying to figure out the who or how many people were involved as suspects. Also, in terms of we were talking about eyewitness testimony, it can back up witness testimony and prove it false. So if somebody gives eyewitness accounts, the evidence can support that. It can link a suspect with a victim or with a crime scene. It can determine the identity of people associated with the crime and allows investigators to reconstruct a crime scene. That's why evidence is so important, why you want it in its most purest form. So who's a part of the investigation team? Usually first you have, who shows up to a crime scene, typically it's police. They're usually the officers on the scene, and you want to establish a perimeter. Then you have your backup police who show up. And then if possibly, depending on the case, you might have your district attorney might show up to make sure that things are going appropriately and things are being followed in case a lawsuit were to ensue, or to make sure things are being followed properly. Then you might have your medics if it's needed. Then you have afterwards you have your investigators, your medical examiners, and then you see right here the photographers come in, the lab technicians that are more the scientific people come in. And then your lab experts. Now, not in every crime scene. Depends on what happened. So there's 7 S's of a crime scene investigation. 1 is secure the scene. 2, you want to separate your witnesses. 3, scan the scene. 4, see the scene. 5, sketch the scene. So we're gonna talk about all these here in a minute. So here we go. Let's go with the first one, I guess. So 1, secure the scene. So the first responding police officers must make sure the scene is secure by first making sure all individuals in the area are safe, and second by preserving evidence. So you see right here, putting a perimeter. That's the first goal. So this person would obtain medical assistance if needed. So if somebody's injured at the crime scene, they need medical attention. That's their responsibility to make sure that happens. 2, they want to arrest the suspects if there are suspects at the scene. 3, you want to isolate the area, as you see right here with the yellow tape. And then 4, request additional needs for investigation. So maybe you might need some forensics. You might need some blood experts. So you kind of figure out and scan what you might need. So this is something that I've learned and talked to police officers. The victim can only be killed once. The crime scene can be murdered by 1,000 times, meaning that it's really important that you secure this scene, because if you go on the scene, again, the transfer of your DNA can alter and change. It can really ruin an investigation. So that's why it's really important to secure the scene. 2, separating the witnesses. Witnesses must not be allowed to talk to each other. Because you don't want collusion. You don't want witnesses talking to each other and sharing ideas. Like you want to get perception in what somebody saw. So if you have people your witnesses are talking to each other, they can make a story, and you don't want that. You want to try to get its most purest form of what people saw. So you separate the witnesses. 3, scan the scene. Forensic examiners scan the scene to see where photos should be taken. The primary and secondary crime scenes must be determined. So again, for example, like you see this picture. Here's a primary scene where the crime may have occurred, but outside there might be other evidence. So there's be primary and there's secondary crime scenes. So anyway, hey guys, there's gonna be another video. So keep on to that.